My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for Dante Moretti's collar, the silk of his tie cool against my fingertips. 3 months I'd worked in this mansion. 3 months of keeping my head down and my observations to myself. But this morning was different. The grand foyer smelled of lemon polish and the faint trace of Dante's cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and leather that seemed to linger in every room he occupied. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric patterns across the marble floor I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees just yesterday. The chandelier above us sparkled like a constellation of diamonds, worth more than everything my family had ever owned combined. "You missed a spot," Dante said, his voice a low rumble that made the other staff jump. Not me, though. I'd learned quickly that his bark was worse than his bite, at least with those who did their jobs well. I adjusted the Windsor knot, my knuckles brushing against the crisp white shirt beneath. His jaw was freshly shaved, and I could see the faint scar that ran along his left cheekbone, a reminder of whatever violent past had shaped him into the man everyone feared. At 34, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no and meant it. "There," I said, smoothing the tie flat against his chest. "Perfect." His dark eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something flicker there. Curiosity, maybe, or surprise that I wasn't cowering like Maria, the other housemaid who literally ran from rooms when he entered. That's when I saw it through the window behind him. Giovanni, the driver who'd been with the Moretti family for 5 years, adjusting something at his hip. The morning light caught the metallic edge of a gun barrel as he shifted his jacket. My heart hammered against my ribs. Giovanni always carried a weapon. All of Dante's security did. But not concealed like that. Not positioned for a quick draw. And not with that expression on his face. The one I'd seen on my brother's face the night before he tried to rob a convenience store. Desperate determination, mixed with barely concealed fear. I kept my expression neutral, my hands still on Dante's tie. Years of watching my mother navigate my father's volatile moods had taught me how to mask every emotion, how to become invisible when necessary and bold when survival demanded it. "Your driver has a gun," I whispered, my lips barely moving. "Don't get in the car." Dante's entire body went rigid beneath my hands. His eyes, which had been almost warm, turned to ice in an instant. "What did you say?" I didn't repeat myself. Instead, I stepped back, picked up the lint roller from the console table, and ran it over his shoulders with practiced efficiency. To anyone watching, we were simply finishing his morning routine. "Giovanni," I said, my voice so low it was almost subaudible. "Hip holster. Quick draw position." He keeps looking at the car, then at his watch. Wrong body language for a regular security detail. Dante's jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping beneath his skin. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I wondered if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Men like Dante Moretti didn't appreciate being told what to do, especially not by 23-year-old housemaids who'd only been in their employ for a quarter of a year. "Antonio," he called out, his voice carrying that edge of command that made people move. A broad-shouldered man appeared from the adjacent sitting room, his hand already resting on his own weapon. Antonio was Dante's head of security, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite, and whose loyalty was absolute. "Cancel the car," Dante said, his eyes never leaving my face. "Tell Giovanni I've decided to work from home today." Antonio's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. "Sir?" "Now." Antonio disappeared, and I could hear his footsteps echoing through the marble hallway, followed by the low rumble of Italian being spoken too quickly for me to follow. I'd picked up some of the language in my 3 months here, enough to understand when the kitchen staff was complaining about me, or when Signora Moretti, Dante's mother, was discussing the menu for dinner parties. but not enough to follow rapid-fire conversations between men whose entire vocabulary seemed to revolve around violence and territory. "Wait in my study," Dante said to me, his voice brooking no argument. "Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone. Understand?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. The study was on the second floor, a room I'd only entered to dust and vacuum when Dante was away. It smelled of old books and expensive whiskey, with walls lined with leather-bound volumes I suspected no one actually read. They were for show, like everything else in this house. A facade of legitimacy stretched over an empire built on fear and carefully orchestrated violence. I climbed the curved staircase, my sensible black flats silent on the runner that probably cost more than a year of my salary. $300 a week, plus room and board in the servants' quarters. It was more than I'd made waitressing at the diner where Dante's men had found me. More than my mother made cleaning houses in our old neighborhood. The servants' quarters were actually nicer than the apartment I'd shared with my mother and two younger brothers before taking this position. A small room with a single bed, a dresser, and a private bathroom. Luxury compared to sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room, while my brothers shared the only bedroom. I settled into the leather chair facing Dante's desk, my hands clasped in my lap to hide their shaking. Through the window, I could see Giovanni being led away by two of Antonio's men, his face pale and his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Smart. Resisting would have been suicide. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I counted the books on the shelves to distract myself, noting which ones had cracked spines from actual reading and which ones were pristine display pieces. The clock on the mantel ticked with metronomic precision, each second stretching like taffy. When the door finally opened, Dante entered alone. He'd removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. There was blood on his knuckles, fresh and bright red. "You were right," he said, moving to the bar cart and pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. Giovanni was planning to drive me into an ambush. The Castellanos paid him $50,000 to deliver me to them. The Castellanos. Even I knew that name. A rival family that had been encroaching on Moretti territory for the past 6 months. My mother's cousin worked at one of their social clubs, serving drinks to men who spoke in whispers and counted money at corner tables. 3 months you've been here, Dante continued, studying me over the rim of his glass. 3 months. And I don't know anything about you, except that Maria says you're the only maid she's ever worked with who isn't afraid of me. Maria is afraid of her own shadow, I replied before I could stop myself. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. True. But you're not. Why? I considered lying, offering some platitude about respect or professionalism. But Dante Moretti hadn't built his empire by being stupid, and he wouldn't appreciate being treated like he was. My father used to hit my mother when he drank, I said. Which was every night. He'd get this look in his eyes, like he was daring us to say something, to give him an excuse. I learned early how to read people, how to know when to stay quiet and when to speak up. You have that same intensity, but you don't hit people for no reason. You have rules, structure, predictability. Fear is only useful if it's unpredictable. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us. And what made you look at Giovanni this morning? What made you notice? The way he kept touching his hip, I said. Like he was nervous about the weight there, and his eyes. He kept looking at the car, then at his watch, then at you. That's not how security acts. That's how someone acts when they're about to do something they know is wrong. Dante set down his glass and moved to stand in front of me. Up close, I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the faint copper tang of blood mixing with his cologne. You saved my life today, he said softly. Do you understand that? I did. And I also understood that in Dante Moretti's world, that came with consequences. Debts were always paid, one way or another. I want you to work as my personal assistant, he continued. Maria can take over your cleaning duties. You'll accompany me to meetings, take notes, observe. Your salary will triple, and you'll move to the guest wing on the 3rd floor. It wasn't a request. Men like Dante didn't make requests. Why? I asked, the question slipping out before I could weigh the wisdom of asking it. Because you see things other people miss, he replied. And in my business, that skill is worth more than gold. Also, he paused, something almost vulnerable flickering across his features before being ruthlessly suppressed. You adjusted my tie this morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like I was just a man, not a monster. No one has treated me like that in a very long time. My heart did something complicated in my chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the sudden realization that Dante Moretti was, underneath all the power and violence, profoundly lonely. I'll need to tell my mother, I said. She'll worry if I don't call. Use the phone on my desk. Take as long as you need. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. This morning, I'd been a housemaid. Now I was being promoted to a position that would put me at the center of Dante's empire, would give me access to secrets that people killed to protect. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A strange sense of rightness, as if all the years of watching and learning and surviving had been leading me to this exact moment. I picked up the phone and dialed my mother's number, already knowing what I would tell her. That I'd been promoted, that the pay was better, that I was safe. The last part, at least, was probably a lie. The guest wing bedroom was 3 times the size of my previous quarters, with windows overlooking the manicured gardens where morning mist clung to sculpted hedges. I stood at the glass, watching security patrol the perimeter, their movements synchronized like dancers in some deadly ballet. 24 hours since I'd whispered my warning, and already my world had transformed completely. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Miss Rossi? Signor Moretti is waiting in his office. I turned to find Elena, the head housekeeper, standing in the doorway with an expression that mixed curiosity and barely concealed resentment. She'd worked for the Morettis for 15 years, had probably expected any promotion to go to someone with seniority and connections, not to the new girl who'd somehow caught Dante's attention. Thank you, Elena. I smoothed down the charcoal dress she delivered to my room that morning, along with 3 others, 2 pairs of shoes, and a leather portfolio embossed with the Moretti crest, all in my exact size, acquired overnight through means I didn't want to examine too closely. Dante's office was on the ground floor, adjacent to the library, with soundproof walls and windows that were bullet-resistant according to Maria's whispered gossip. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing documents with the same intensity he probably brought to everything in his life. Sit, he said without looking up, gesturing to the chair across from him. I settled into the leather seat, noting the way his shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing the defined muscles of his forearms. His tie was perfectly knotted today, no need for my assistance, though I found myself oddly disappointed by that fact. Giovanni talked, Dante said, finally meeting my eyes. Before Antonio finished with him. The Castellanos have been planning this for months. They knew my schedule, my routes, where I was vulnerable. Someone inside gave them that information. The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone else in the household was compromised. You need me to watch people, I said, understanding clicking into place. Not just take notes at meetings. You need me to see who's lying, who's nervous, who's planning something. A slight smile touched his lips. You're quick. Good. We have a shipment arriving tonight at the docks. Perfectly legitimate, of course. The way he said it made clear it was anything but. Representatives from 3 of our partner organizations will be there. I want you with me, observing. What am I looking for? Anything that feels wrong. the way Giovanni felt wrong. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with unnerving intensity. "Tell me about your father." The subject change caught me off guard. "What? You said he used to hit your mother. Is that why you're so good at reading people? At knowing when violence is coming?" I clasped my hands in my lap, forcing myself to meet his gaze. If I was going to work for Dante Moretti, I couldn't afford to show weakness. My father worked construction until he hurt his back. After that, he drank. Whiskey, mostly. By the time I was 12, I'd learned to judge how dangerous the night would be by counting how many bottles he'd emptied. I learned to be invisible when I needed to be, and bold when staying quiet would be worse. And where is he now? Dead. Heart attack 3 years ago. My mother says I shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to our family. Something flickered in Dante's eyes. Not pity, which I would have hated, but understanding. "My father died when I was 16, he said. "Bullet to the head in an alley behind one of our restaurants. Rival family sent a message written in his blood. I found him." The casual way he delivered this information, as if discussing the weather, told me more about Dante Moretti than hours of conversation could have. He'd learned early, like I had, that survival meant suppressing emotion, building walls around anything that could be used as a weapon against you. "I'm sorry," I said, because it seemed like what one should say, even though sorry felt inadequate for that kind of trauma. "Don't be. It taught me what I needed to know about this world. That loyalty is the only currency that matters. That weakness gets you killed. That family is everything, but blood doesn't always mean family." He stood, circling the desk to lean against it, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You saved my life yesterday, Lena. That makes you family now, whether you planned it or not." My name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. No one here called me Lena except Maria, and even she usually stuck to the formal Miss Rossi when others were around. "Does that mean I can't quit?" I asked, trying to inject levity into the suddenly heavy atmosphere. "It means you can, but I hope you won't." His hand moved, almost unconsciously, to adjust his tie, even though it didn't need adjusting. "I've had assistants before, 3 of them. One stole from me and disappeared. One got too ambitious and tried to play both sides with the Castellanos. One simply couldn't handle the reality of what I do and left crying in the middle of a negotiation. What happened to them? The first one is still missing. The second one isn't. The third one I let go with a generous severance and a non-disclosure agreement that's backed up by more than lawyers. The unspoken threat was clear, but somehow it didn't frighten me the way it should have. Maybe because I'd grown up with threats, had learned to evaluate which ones were real and which were just posturing. Dante's warnings were real, but they were also honest. He wasn't trying to manipulate me with false charm or empty promises. This was the deal. Loyalty for protection, service for security, observation for opportunity. "The docks tonight," I said. "What should I wear?" His smile was genuine this time, transforming his usually severe features into something almost boyish. Something dark and practical. Where we're going, designer heels would be a liability. The docks at midnight smelled of salt water, motor oil, and something organic that I didn't want to identify too closely. I stood beside Dante, wearing black pants and a fitted jacket that Elena had somehow procured in the 6 hours since our morning meeting. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and I'd forgone makeup except for a touch of lip balm. 3 black SUVs were parked in a semicircle around a shipping container, headlights cutting through the darkness. Men stood in clusters, their body language revealing the hierarchy as clearly as any organizational chart. Dante's men formed a protective circle, Antonio at his right hand, another enforcer named Marco at his left. I stood slightly behind Dante, my new portfolio clutched in my hands, trying to look simultaneously professional and invisible. "Moretti, a heavy-set man called out, approaching with the swagger of someone who was used to being feared. Punctual as always. My people said the shipment arrived on schedule. When have I ever been late, Russo? Dante's voice carried an edge of amusement, but his posture remained tense, ready. I watched the interaction, cataloging details. Russo's men stood too close to their weapons, hands hovering near holsters in a way that suggested nervousness rather than confidence. One of them kept glancing toward the water, as if expecting something from that direction. Another was sweating despite the cool night air, his knee bouncing with barely contained energy. "Open it," Russo commanded, and 2 of his men moved to unlock the container. The doors swung open, revealing crates stacked floor to ceiling. The kind that could hold construction equipment or machine parts or any number of legitimate goods. I knew they didn't, though. The tension in the air was too thick for anything legal. Dante moved forward to inspect the contents, and I followed, keeping my expression neutral. Inside the crates were weapons, not handguns or hunting rifles, but military-grade equipment that made my stomach clench. Assault rifles, ammunition, something that looked like it belonged on a battlefield, not in a shipping container at a civilian dock. "Everything as requested," Russo said, pride evident in his voice. "My contacts in Eastern Europe came through. These are clean, untraceable. No serial numbers, no paper trail." Dante examined one of the rifles with professional efficiency, checking the mechanisms with practiced ease. "The payment will be transferred to the usual accounts within 24 hours. "About that," Russo said, and something in his tone made my skin prickle with warning. "I've been thinking we should renegotiate our terms. The risk I'm taking, bringing in merchandise like this, I think deserves a larger percentage." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dante straightened slowly, setting the rifle back in its crate with deliberate care. "We have a contract, Russo. Signed and sealed. I don't renegotiate contracts after delivery. That's not how I do business. Maybe it should be." Russo's hand moved to rest on his belt, near his weapon. His men shifted, spreading out in a formation that suddenly looked less like a business meeting and more like a prelude to violence. I pressed my fingernails into my palm, using the pain to keep myself anchored. This was escalating too quickly, and we were outnumbered. Dante's security was good, but Russo had brought at least 15 men to Dante's 8. That's when I noticed it. The man who'd been glancing toward the water was now gesturing. Small movements that could have been nervous fidgeting, but weren't. He was signaling. And from the darkness beyond the reach of the headlights, I caught the reflection of metal. Gun barrels, at least half a dozen, positioned in the shadows. "Dante," I said quietly, stepping closer to him. 3 o'clock. In the dark. They have backup. His body went rigid for a fraction of a second, then relaxed. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost bored. "Russo, you disappoint me. I thought you were smarter than this." Russo's confident expression faltered. "I don't know what—" "The men you have positioned in the shadows. The ambush you've so carefully arranged. It's sloppy. I expected better from someone with your reputation. How did Dante know I was right? He couldn't see what I'd seen, couldn't have spotted the glinting metal from his angle. But he trusted my warning immediately, without question, the same way he'd trusted me about Giovanni." "Antonio," Dante said, still not raising his voice. "Lights." Antonio touched something on his phone, and suddenly the entire dock was illuminated by floodlights mounted on poles I hadn't even noticed. The men hiding in the shadows were exposed, caught in the harsh white light like insects under a magnifying glass. But that wasn't all. From positions I hadn't spotted, Dante's own men emerged. At least 20 of them, armed and positioned strategically around the entire dock. We'd never been outnumbered. It had been theater, a test, and Russo had failed spectacularly. "You see, Russo," Dante continued, pulling a handgun from inside his jacket with casual grace. I don't take meetings without insurance. Did you really think I'd come here with only 8 men? That I wouldn't scout the location first? That I wouldn't have contingencies?" He chambered around, the metallic click echoing across the water. "The difference between you and me is that I plan for betrayal. I expect it. I prepare for it. You just hope for the best and scramble when things go wrong." Russo's face had gone pale. "Moretti, this is a misunderstanding. I never meant—" "You meant to renegotiate by force, to take what you wanted because you thought I was vulnerable." Dante's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. "Let me be clear about something. I'm never vulnerable. And people who try to take advantage of my perceived weakness don't get second chances." The gunshot, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Russo dropped, a hole in the center of his forehead, dead before his body hit the ground. His men froze, caught between the impulse to fight and the reality of being completely outmatched. "Anyone else want to renegotiate?" Dante asked the crowd at large. "No? Good. Marco, handle the cleanup. Antonio, make sure Russo's people understand that our original contracts still stand, just with new management on their end." He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Lena, we're leaving." I followed him back to the SUV on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I just watched a man die. Watched Dante Moretti execute someone with the same casual efficiency most people brought to swatting flies. I should have been horrified, should have been running, should have been anything other than what I was, which was strangely calm. Inside the SUV, Dante lit a cigarette, something I'd never seen him do before. "You saw the backup before anyone else did," he said, exhaling smoke toward the cracked window. "How?" One of Russo's men kept signaling, small movements, but deliberate, and the reflection off the gun barrels when the angle of the headlights shifted. "You saved my life again, twice in 2 days." He studied me through the smoke. "You realize what that means, don't you? In my world, that kind of debt isn't paid with money or favors. That kind of debt is permanent." "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "It means you're mine now, Lena Rossi. Under my protection. In my inner circle. No one touches you without going through me. But it also means you're tied to me, to my world, to everything I do. There's no walking away from that. Not safely. I should have felt trapped. Instead, I felt something else. Something dangerous and intoxicating. I understand. Do you?" He leaned closer, near enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the smoke and cologne. "I don't think you do. Not yet. But you will." The drive back to the mansion was silent, but the air between us crackled with something unnamed. When we arrived, Dante walked me to my door on the 3rd floor, a gesture that seemed almost courtly from a man who'd just killed someone. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start your real education." As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that somewhere between adjusting his tie yesterday morning and watching him execute Russo tonight, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just working for Dante Moretti anymore. I was becoming part of his world, and God help me, I wasn't sure I wanted to leave it. 6 weeks had passed since the night at the docks, and I'd learned more about Dante's empire than most of his soldiers knew in years. The morning routine had become sacred. I arrived at his office at 7, found him already reviewing reports, and spent the first hour organizing his schedule while he explained the intricacies of what he called family business. Today, he was teaching me about territory disputes while drinking espresso that his mother's personal chef had prepared. The Moretti mansion kitchen smelled of fresh bread and simmering tomato sauce, scents that had become as familiar as the weight of the gun Dante had insisted I learn to carry after the 3rd business meeting had nearly turned violent. "The Castellanos are pushing into the south end," Dante said, pointing to a map spread across his desk. Red pins marked Moretti territory, blue for rivals. 3 of our collection points have been hit in the past week. Small amounts each time, testing our response. I studied the pattern, noting how the hits formed a line moving progressively closer to one of the major distribution centers. They're not actually after the money from those locations, I said. The amounts are too small. They're mapping your security response times, seeing how long it takes for reinforcements to arrive. Dante's expression shifted to something that might have been pride. Exactly. Which means the real target is here. I touched a spot on the map where the line of attacks would naturally terminate. The warehouse on Marlborough Street. Whatever you're storing there, that's what they want. Weapons, he said. A shipment from overseas, similar to Russo's but larger. Worth about $3 million to the right buyers. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. I'm moving it tonight. I want you there. Why do you always bring me to these things? I asked, the question that had been building for weeks finally escaping. I take notes and observe, but Antonio or Marco could do that. Why me? Dante was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the desk's leather surface. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more intimate. Because you see patterns everyone else misses. Because you're not afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. And because... He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Because I trust you in a way I haven't trusted anyone since my father died. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to examine. Our relationship had evolved beyond employer and assistant, beyond protector and protected, into something undefined and dangerous. I caught myself watching the way his hands moved when he was thinking, noticed the rare, genuine smiles he reserved only for our private conversations, felt my pulse quicken when he stood too close. This morning, he'd adjusted his own tie, but then he'd asked me to fix it, claiming the knot wasn't quite right. My fingers had lingered on the silk longer than necessary, and his hand had come to rest briefly on my waist, steadying me as I reached up. Neither of us had acknowledged it, but the touch had burned like a brand. Miss Rossi? Elena's voice interrupted from the doorway. Signora Moretti requests your presence in the salon, Dante's mother. I'd managed to avoid lengthy interactions with her for weeks, but apparently my luck had run out. I glanced at Dante, who nodded permission. Sophia Moretti sat in the salon like a queen, holding court, surrounded by fresh flowers and antique furniture that probably belonged in a museum. At 63, she was still beautiful, with silver-streaked dark hair and Dante's same penetrating gaze. She wore Chanel and pearls at 10 in the morning, as if casual elegance required no effort at all. Sit, dear, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Tea? Thank you, Signora Moretti. I accepted the delicate china cup she poured, noting how her hands remained steady and precise. This woman hadn't gotten to her position by being fragile. You've been working closely with my son, she observed, adding a precise amount of sugar to her own tea. Very closely, from what I understand. The staff talks, you know, about how he trusts you with information he shares with no one else, about how you accompany him to meetings that would make grown men weep. Signor Moretti has been kind enough to teach me about the family business, I said carefully. Kind. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. My son is many things, Lena. Intelligent, ruthless, capable of great violence when necessary. But kind? That's not a word I'd use. She sipped her tea, watching me over the rim. Do you know what happened to the last woman who got close to Dante? Before you? My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. No, Signora. Her name was Isabella. Beautiful, from a good family, educated. They were engaged. I'd already begun planning the wedding. Sophia's voice remained pleasant, conversational, as if discussing the weather. Then she made a mistake. She betrayed my son's trust, passed information to a rival family. Dante discovered it on what would have been their wedding day. What happened to her? No one knows. She simply disappeared. Some say Dante killed her himself. Others say he had her family do it as penance for her betrayal. I don't know the truth, and I've never asked. But I do know that my son hasn't allowed anyone close since then. Until you. The implication was clear. I was being warned, gently but unmistakably. Don't hurt him or suffer the consequences. But there was something else underneath, something that sounded almost like hope. I have no intention of betraying Signor Moretti's trust, I said. Good. Because whether you realize it or not, you've become important to him. I see the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, the way he softens, just slightly, when you're in the room. She set down her teacup with a decisive click. My son needs someone who isn't afraid of him, Lena. Someone who sees the man beneath the reputation. But he also needs someone who understands the cost of being in his world, the danger, the compromises, the blood. I understand, I said quietly. Do you? Then answer me this. Could you watch him kill someone who deserved it and still sleep peacefully afterward? Could you make the hard choices that keep this family safe? Could you be ruthless when ruthlessness is required? I thought about Russo falling to the dock with a hole in his head. Thought about the weapons shipments I'd helped coordinate. Thought about the fear in people's eyes when Dante entered a room and the respect they showed because of that fear. Yes, I said. I could. Sophia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. You have your mother's strength in you, and your grandmother's fire. My husband's men did a background check when Dante promoted you. I know about your father, about your family, about the violence you survived. You're not some naive girl who thinks love conquers all. You know better. I'm not in love with your son, Signora, I said, the lie feeling hollow even as I spoke it. Her smile was knowing. Not yet, perhaps. But you will be. And when you are, remember this conversation. Remember that loving a man like Dante means accepting all of him. The darkness and the light. The violence and the tenderness. There's no middle ground in our world. You're either all in, or you're a liability. That night, the warehouse operation went exactly as I'd predicted. The Castellanos hit the decoy location Dante had set up, walking straight into a trap that resulted in 6 of their men arrested and 3 dead. The real shipment moved safely to a new location, and Dante's reputation for being 3 steps ahead of his enemies was reinforced. We returned to the mansion near dawn, both exhausted but wired on adrenaline. Dante's jacket was spattered with blood that wasn't his, and there was a cut on his cheek from flying glass when one of the Castellano men had tried to shoot through a car window. Let me clean that, I said, gesturing to the cut. In his private bathroom, I dampened a cloth and gently cleaned the wound while he sat on the counter, making him nearly eye level with me. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable, his hands coming to rest lightly on my hips as I worked, my body positioned between his knees. My mother talked to you today, he said quietly. What did she say? That I should be careful, that you're dangerous. I met his gaze, my thumb brushing near the cut. That the last woman who got close to you ended badly. Isabella. His jaw tightened. She chose money over loyalty, sold information that got 8 of my men killed, including Antonio's younger brother. I didn't kill her, but I made sure she understood there was no coming back from that betrayal. She's alive, living somewhere in South America under a new name, with the understanding that if she ever returns or contacts anyone from her old life, she dies. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what this world demands. Absolute loyalty, absolute trust. There's no room for doubt or divided allegiances. His hands tightened on my hips, pulling me incrementally closer. And because I need you to know that what I'm feeling isn't something I've felt in a very long time. It scares me more than any rival family ever could. My breath caught. Dante. I know it's insane. You've worked for me for less than 3 months. You're 12 years younger than me. You should be finishing college and dating boys your own age, not standing in a warehouse watching me negotiate with arms dealers. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. But I can't stop thinking about you, about the way you adjusted my tie that first morning, about your courage when most people would have stayed silent, about how you're not afraid to challenge me when you think I'm wrong. I'm not afraid of you, I said, my hand still on his face. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. You should be, he murmured, but he was leaning closer, his eyes dropping to my lips. I'm not a good man, Lena. I've done terrible things. I'll do more terrible things before this is over. Anyone close to me becomes a target. I know. And you're still here. I'm still here. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Soft at first, almost tentative, as if neither of us was quite sure we should be doing this. Then deeper, his hand sliding up my back, my fingers tangling in his hair. It tasted like danger and desire, like crossing a line we both knew we couldn't uncross. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against mine. This changes everything, he said. I know. If you want to leave, I'll arrange it. Somewhere safe where no one can find you. Money to start over. I won't hold you to any debt or obligation. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Is that what you want? No, he admitted. But what I want and what's good for you aren't the same thing. Let me decide what's good for me. I traced the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble that had grown in during the long night. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protection from the world. I grew up in violence, Dante. I know what it looks like, what it costs. And I'm choosing to stay. Something in his expression cracked, the iron control slipping to reveal the man underneath. Then stay, he whispered. Stay with me. I kissed him again, answering without words, sealing a decision I knew would change the trajectory of my entire life. When Dante finally led me to his bedroom, carrying me across the threshold like something precious, I knew I was stepping into a point of no return. By the time the sun rose fully, painting the room in gold light, I was his in every way that mattered. And he was mine. 3 months since that night in Dante's bathroom, and the dynamic had shifted entirely. I no longer slept in the guest wing. My clothes had migrated to his walk-in closet. My toothbrush stood next to his in the marble bathroom, and the staff had stopped referring to me as Miss Rossi. Now it was simply Lena, spoken with the same respect they showed Dante himself. The September morning air carried a chill that promised autumn's arrival. I stood at the window of what had become our bedroom, watching Dante's security patrol the grounds in their synchronized patterns. The estate's gardens were still green, but the edges of the maple trees were beginning to turn, hints of gold and crimson among the leaves. Behind me, I heard Dante's phone ring with the specific tone he'd set for Antonio. Business, always business, even at 6 a.m. Talk to me. Dante's voice was rough with sleep, but alert. Years of running an empire had trained him to wake fully at the first sign of trouble. I couldn't hear Antonio's response, but I watched Dante's face in the reflection of the window, the way his jaw tightened, how his free hand curled into a fist against the bed sheets. Bad news, then. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. Longer this time. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Assemble everyone. He ended the call and was already moving, pulling on the clothes he'd discarded the night before. The Castellanos hit one of our clubs last night. 3 dead, including the manager. They left a message. What kind of message? I asked, turning from the window. the kind written in blood on the walls. They want war, and they're not being subtle about it. He strapped on his shoulder holster, checking the gun with practiced efficiency. I need you to stay here today. Extra security on the estate. Antonio thinks this might be a distraction, that they're planning something bigger. Let me come with you, I said, already reaching for my own clothes. No. His tone left no room for argument. Not this time. If they're escalating to this level, I can't guarantee your safety. I won't risk you. I wanted to argue, to insist that I'd been in dangerous situations before. But the look in his eyes stopped me. This was fear, raw and unfiltered. Fear for me, and that realization made my chest tight. Be careful, I whispered, crossing to him and adjusting his tie, our morning ritual. Come back to me. He caught my hands, pressing them against his chest where I could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady. Always. Then he kissed me, hard and desperate, before pulling away and striding out the door. I watched from the window as his SUV pulled away, flanked by 2 security vehicles. The convoy disappeared through the gates, and I was left with a feeling of dread I couldn't shake. The morning passed slowly. I tried to work, reviewing the books for the legitimate businesses Dante used as fronts, but the numbers blurred together. By noon, I'd given up and retreated to the library, trying to lose myself in a novel that had no connection to organized crime or family politics. That's when I heard it. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of sound. The usual background noise of the estate, staff moving through hallways, the distant hum of kitchen activity had stopped, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire house. I set down my book, every instinct I'd honed over the past 6 months screaming warning. Something was wrong. The door to the library burst open. Not Elena or Maria, but a man I didn't recognize. Medium height, dark hair, holding a gun with the casual confidence of someone who'd used one frequently. Lena Rossi, he said, almost pleasantly. You're coming with us. Us became apparent as 2 more men entered, both armed. In the hallway beyond, I could see Marco, one of Dante's security, unconscious on the floor with blood pooling beneath his head. I'm not going anywhere with you, I said, grateful that my voice came out steady despite the terror coursing through me. The first man laughed. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Makes this more fun. He nodded to his companions. Grab her. My hand moved to the gun Dante had insisted I carry, the compact Glock tucked into the holster at my back. I managed to get it halfway out before one of the men slammed into me, driving me against the bookshelf. Books rained down as we struggled, my finger desperately seeking the trigger even as his hand closed around my wrist. Pain exploded across my face as someone hit me. My vision blurred, the taste of blood filling my mouth. I fought anyway, remembering every dirty trick Dante's trainers had taught me. I got one knee up, connecting with something soft, heard a satisfying grunt of pain. But there were 3 of them, and 1 of me. They pulled my arms behind my back, plastic zip ties biting into my wrists. A cloth bag went over my head, turning my world dark. Moretti's going to lose his mind when he finds out we have his pet, one of them said, sounding pleased. Castellano promised a bonus for bringing her in alive. Didn't say anything about unharmed, though. They dragged me through the house. I tried to memorize the turns, counting steps, listening for any identifying sounds. Out a door, the temperature dropping as we moved from interior to exterior, thrown into what felt like a vehicle, landing hard on my shoulder. The engine started, and we were moving. I forced myself to breathe slowly, fighting panic. Dante would come for me. He had resources, connections, an entire organization at his command. He would find me. I just had to survive until he did. The warehouse they took me to smelled of rust and stagnant water. When they finally removed the bag from my head, I found myself in a space that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, concrete floor stained with substances I didn't want to identify. A man sat on a wooden chair in the center of the space. Older, maybe late 50s, with silver hair and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He wore an expensive suit that looked incongruous in the decrepit surroundings. "Miss Rossi," he said, his accent placing his origins somewhere in Sicily. "I'm Vittorio Castellano. I apologize for the rough treatment. My men can be enthusiastic. If you're apologizing, you could start by cutting these zip ties off my wrists." He smiled, genuinely amused. "I like you. I can see why Dante is so taken. But no, I think we'll keep you restrained for now. My nephew died at your boyfriend's hands 3 months ago. You might be motivated to seek revenge." Russo, the man Dante had executed at the docks. I'd forgotten that he was connected to the Castellano family. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. This was a message. A way to hurt Dante in a way that bullets and territorial disputes couldn't. "I want Dante Moretti to understand what loss feels like," Vittorio said, standing and circling me slowly. "He's taken from my family for years. Territory, business, respect. Men I've known since childhood. And he does it all with that cold efficiency, as if it's just business. Nothing personal." His voice hardened. "Well, this is personal. I'm going to take the thing he values most. You. Killing me won't accomplish anything except guaranteeing your own death," I said. "Dante will raise this entire city to find you." "Who said anything about killing you?" Vittorio stopped in front of me, tilting his head. "Death would be too quick, too clean. No, I have something else in mind. You see, there are buyers, certain organizations overseas, who pay very well for young women, especially educated, pretty ones like yourself. By the time Dante figures out where you've gone, you'll be on a ship halfway around the world, living a very different kind of life." Ice flooded my veins. He was talking about trafficking, about selling me like property to whoever paid the highest price, a fate that might actually be worse than death. "You're insane," I whispered. "I'm practical. You disappear. Dante spends his resources searching for you instead of defending his territory, and I move in on his operations while he's distracted. By the time he accepts that you're gone, I'll own half his business. And if he somehow does find you years from now, you won't be the woman he remembers. You'll be broken, used, destroyed. Either way, I win." The door burst open, and one of the guards rushed in. "Boss, we have a problem. Moretti's people are here. They found us." Vittorio's expression shifted to something cold and calculating. "How many?" "All of them. He brought his entire organization. They're surrounding the building." A slow smile spread across Vittorio's face. "Even better. If he breaches, we kill the girl right in front of him. Let him live with that. Go, prepare the men." As the guard ran out, Vittorio pulled a gun from his jacket. "It seems our time together is shorter than I planned, Miss Rossi. But don't worry, the message will still be sent." He pressed the gun against my temple, the metal cold and unyielding. I closed my eyes, thinking of Dante, of the morning ritual of fixing his tie, of the way he'd looked at me just hours ago, the way he'd said, "always," when I asked him to come back. I was going to die without telling him I loved him, without admitting what had become obvious to everyone else. The sound of gunfire erupted outside, followed by shouting and the crash of doors being breached. Vittorio's hand tightened on the gun, his finger moving to the trigger. "Say goodbye, Miss Rossi." Then the world exploded into chaos. The warehouse doors blew inward with a concussive force that shook dust from the rafters. Through the smoke and debris, I saw him. Dante moved like violence incarnate, his gun an extension of his arm as he fired with surgical precision. 3 of Castellano's guards dropped before they could even raise their weapons. Antonio flanked him on the right, Marco, bandaged but standing, on the left. Behind them, a A small army of Moretti soldiers poured through the breach. "Lena!" Dante's voice cut through the chaos, raw with something I'd never heard from him before. Desperation. Vittorio jerked me to my feet, the gun now pressed against my spine. "Stop right there, Moretti, or I paint these walls with her brains." Everyone froze. The gunfire died, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the crackle of small fires from the explosive entry. Dante stood 20 feet away, his weapon trained on Vittorio's head, but unable to take the shot without risking me. "Let her go, Castellano," Dante said, his voice deadly calm in a way that was somehow more terrifying than shouting would have been. "This is between you and me." "Is it?" Vittorio laughed, bitter and sharp. "You've made it clear for years that nothing is personal with you, Moretti. Just business, cold calculations. But I've finally found the one thing that breaks through that ice, the one person who makes you feel something." He pressed the gun harder against my spine, making me gasp. "So yes, this is between you and me, but she's the battlefield." I met Dante's eyes across the space between us. In them, I saw everything he'd never said aloud. The fear of losing me, the guilt of dragging me into his world, the love he'd been too damaged to fully express. And beneath it all, a promise of annihilation for anyone who hurt me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not sure if he could hear me, but needing to say it anyway. "I should have been more careful." "This isn't your fault," he said, and I realized he'd heard. "None of this is your fault." "Touching," Vittorio sneered, "but apologies won't change what happens next. Here's how this works, Moretti. You're going to put down your weapon. Then your men are going to do the same. Then you're going to watch while I kill her. And you're going to know that your weakness, your pathetic attachment to this girl, is what killed her." "No," Dante said simply. "That's not how this works." Before Vittorio could respond, Dante did something I'd never seen him do. He lowered his gun and dropped it to the floor. His hands rose in a gesture of surrender, and a ripple of shock ran through his men. "Boss, what are you doing?" Antonio hissed. "Giving him what he wants," Dante replied, his eyes never leaving Vittorio's face. "Me, unarmed, vulnerable. Isn't that the point? To prove you can hurt me? You don't need her for that. You have me right here." "Dante, no," I started, but Vittorio's hand clamped over my mouth. "Keep talking," Vittorio said, interest flickering in his expression. "Let her go," Dante continued, taking a slow step forward. "Keep me instead. I'm worth more as a hostage. My organization won't move against you if you have me. But her?" He gestured toward me. "She's a civilian. Killing her or trafficking her just makes you a monster, not a strategist. It ruins any legitimacy you might claim." "I don't care about legitimacy," Vittorio spat. "I care about revenge." "Then take it from the source." Another step forward. Dante was now only 15 feet away, well within Vittorio's range. "I'm the one who killed your nephew. I'm the one who's taken your territory. I'm the one who's made you look weak in front of the other families. Your quarrel is with me. Lena just got caught in the crossfire." I could see what he was doing. Every step forward put him closer, made him a more immediate threat, drew Vittorio's attention away from me. It was a calculated risk, the same way everything Dante did was calculated. Except this time, the calculation involved sacrificing himself. "You love her," Vittorio said, wonderment entering his voice as he realized the truth. "You actually love her. The great Dante Moretti, who everyone says has ice water in his veins, who's never shown weakness, who killed his own cousin for stealing from the family. You love this girl." "Yes," Dante said, and the simple admission hit me harder than Vittorio's earlier blow. "I love her, which is why I'm offering you a trade. Let her walk out of here and I'll stay. You can do whatever you want with me. Ransom me, kill me, deliver me to your buyers overseas. I don't care. but she walks away unharmed. "Dante, stop this," I managed to say, despite Vittorio's hand. "You can't—" "I can, and I will," he interrupted, his gaze finally meeting mine. "You asked me to come back to you. I'm making sure you're alive for that to matter." Vittorio was considering it. I could see the gears turning in his head, weighing the options. A dead girl would satisfy his revenge but gain him nothing strategically. The actual head of the Moretti family as a hostage, though, that had value. That could be leveraged into power, territory, money. "Your men stand down," Vittorio said slowly. "All weapons lowered. You come here, kneel, hands behind your head. She walks out with your people. Then we negotiate what your life is worth." "Done," Dante agreed without hesitation. "Boss, you can't be serious," Marco protested. "This is a trap." "I know," Dante replied calmly. "Do it anyway. That's an order." Slowly, reluctantly, Dante's soldiers lowered their weapons. The sound of metal clicking against concrete echoed through the warehouse as guns hit the floor. Dante walked forward, each step measured, until he stood directly in front of Vittorio and me. Up close, I could see the barely controlled fury in his eyes, the tension in every muscle. But his voice remained steady. "Let her go. I'm here. The trade is complete." Vittorio studied him for a long moment, then roughly pushed me forward. I stumbled, would have fallen if Dante hadn't caught me, his hands briefly gripping my arms before Antonio pulled me back toward the safety of their soldiers. "Wait." I struggled against Antonio's hold. "Wait. You can't just—" "Get her out of here," Dante ordered, his voice brooking no argument. He didn't turn to look at me, keeping his attention fixed on Vittorio. "Antonio, that's an order." "Dante!" I screamed as Antonio lifted me bodily, carrying me toward the exit despite my struggles. "No! You can't do this! Dante!" The last thing I saw before Antonio pushed me through the door was Dante kneeling on the concrete, hands behind his head, surrounded by Castellano's men. Vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him, having sacrificed everything for me. The next 6 hours were hell. Antonio drove me back to the estate, where Sofia Moretti waited with a calm that was more terrifying than panic would have been. She took one look at me, bruised and bloodied and hysterical, and simply said, "Tell me everything." I did, the words pouring out in a rush. The kidnapping, Vittorio's threats, the warehouse standoff, Dante's sacrifice. By the time I finished, I was shaking so hard that Sofia had to wrap a blanket around my shoulders, despite the warm September afternoon. "My son is a fool," she said, but there was a hint of pride beneath the exasperation. "A noble fool, but still a fool, trading himself for you, as if dying wouldn't destroy you just as much as dying would have destroyed him." "We have to get him back," I said, though I had no idea how. "There has to be a way." "There is." Sofia pulled out her phone, dialing a number with steady fingers. My husband wasn't the only one with connections in this city. Before I became Mrs. Moretti, I was Sofia Ricci. My family has been in this business for generations. She spoke rapidly in Italian, a conversation I couldn't follow but whose urgency was clear. Over the next several hours, the estate became a war room. Men I'd never seen before arrived, representatives from families across the city. Not all of them were allied with the Morettis, but apparently, Vittorio's tactics had crossed a line even in their world. Taking civilians, threatening trafficking, making moves this blatant drew unwanted attention from law enforcement and jeopardized everyone's operations. "Castellano has become a liability," one of the older men said, his accent placing him from the old country. "His vendetta has made him reckless, bad for business." "Where is he holding Dante?" another asked. "We're working on that," Antonio replied, studying a map of the city covered in pins and notes. "He has 3 possible locations, all warehouses in areas he controls, We're scouting each one now. I stood by the window, watching the sun set, unable to shake the image of Dante kneeling with his hands behind his head. He'd done it without hesitation, had offered himself in exchange for me as if the decision was simple, as if his life wasn't worth infinitely more than mine in the grand scheme of his empire. Lena. Sophia appeared at my elbow, pressing a glass of something amber into my hand. Drink. You look like you're about to collapse. I took a sip, the whiskey burning down my throat. I should have fought harder, should have found a way to stop him from doing exactly what anyone who truly loves someone would do. She raised an eyebrow. My dear, you've been in our world long enough to understand. In this life, the people we love are both our greatest strength and our most exploitable weakness. Vittorio understood that. So did Dante. He simply chose to accept the weakness, to prioritize your life over his own strategic advantage. That doesn't make it right, I whispered. No, she agreed. But it makes it human. And my son hasn't allowed himself to be human in a very long time. You gave that back to him. Whatever happens next, remember that. Boss! One of the scouts burst into the room, breathing hard. We found him. Castellanos holding him at the old shipping warehouse on the waterfront. The same one where he executed Russo, a bitter irony in that location choice. The place where Dante had demonstrated his power was now where Vittorio would try to take it away. How many men does Castellano have? Antonio asked, already strapping on weapons. At least 30 that we can see. Probably more inside. And he's got Dante chained in the center of the warehouse, using him as bait, daring us to attack. Then we don't attack, I said, surprising myself with the clarity in my voice. Everyone turned to look at me. He's expecting a frontal assault, expecting Dante's people to come in guns blazing. That's what he wants, a war that destroys what's left of the Moretti operations. What are you suggesting? Sophia asked, her eyes sharp with interest. That we give him something he's not expecting. Me. The room erupted in protests, but I raised my voice over them. Think about it. Vittorio's entire plan was based on using me to hurt Dante. He doesn't actually want to kill Dante. He wants to break him, to prove that his love for me makes him weak. So we use that. I go in, unarmed, asking to trade myself back. While everyone's attention is on me, your teams move into position. That's suicide, Antonio said flatly. Castellano already tried to sell you once. What makes you think he won't just kill you both? Because Dante's right. I'm only valuable as leverage. Dead, I'm just a body. But alive and willing to trade myself? That's interesting. That's a story Vittorio can use to humiliate Dante in front of the other families. That's worth more to him than my death. Sophia studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She's right. Vittorio's ego is his weakness. He'll want the spectacle, the theater of broken lovers choosing each other over survival. It buys us time and positioning. I don't like this, Antonio muttered. The boss would kill me if anything happened to her. The boss is going to die if we don't get him out of there, I countered. This is our best chance. Maybe our only chance. 20 minutes later, I stood outside the warehouse again, this time of my own volition. The sun had fully set, and floodlights illuminated the building's entrance. 2 guards stood by the door, weapons visible. They'd been told I was coming, that I wanted to negotiate. My hands were raised, showing I carried no weapons. I'd changed into simple clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt, nothing that could conceal anything. The bruises on my face had started to purple, a visible reminder of the earlier violence. I'm here to see Vittorio Castellano, I called out. I'm unarmed. I want to make a deal. The guards exchanged glances, then one spoke into a radio. After a moment, he nodded. Come forward, slowly, hands where we can see them. I walked toward them, heart hammering but steps steady. They patted me down roughly but professionally, confirming I had nothing hidden. Then they opened the door. Inside, the warehouse looked the same as it had hours ago, except now there was a chair in the center where Dante sat, his hands chained above his head to a beam, forcing him to remain standing. Blood dripped from cuts on his face, and his shirt was torn and stained. They'd beaten him, but he was alive. Our eyes met across the space, and fury blazed in his expression. "Lena, what the hell are you doing here?" "Same thing you did for me," I replied. "Coming to make a trade." Vittorio emerged from the shadows, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Miss Rossi, I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Antonio must be getting soft, letting you waltz in here." "He didn't let me," I said. "I insisted, and I'm here with a proposal. You wanted to hurt Dante through me. Wanted to prove that his attachment to me makes him weak. Fine, you've made your point. Now let's finish this another way. I'm listening. You let Dante go. In exchange, I stay, permanently. I'll sign whatever contracts you want, transfer to whoever you're planning to sell me to, whatever. But he walks away alive and unharmed. You still get your victory, still get to destroy him by taking me, but without starting a war that will bring down every family in the city." "Lena, no." Dante surged against his chains, the metal biting into his wrists. "Absolutely not. Don't you dare. You don't get a vote," I interrupted, my voice hard. "You made your choice this afternoon. Now I'm making mine." Vittorio circled me slowly, considering. It's tempting, but what guarantee do I have that Moretti won't just hunt me down the moment he's free? "You'll have my cooperation," I said. "A written statement that I came here willingly, that no crime was committed. That removes any legal pretext for retaliation. And you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that Dante will spend the rest of his life knowing he couldn't save the woman he loves." "Stop talking," Dante snarled, blood dripping from his split lip. "Lena, I swear to God, if you do this, you'll what?" I turned to face him, letting him see the determination in my eyes. "Live with the guilt? Good. Better than being dead. At least guilty means alive." For a long moment, the warehouse was silent except for the sound of Dante's ragged breathing and the distant rumble of traffic outside. Then Vittorio smiled. "Deal. But first." He pulled out a contract, several pages of legal language. "Sign this. States everything you just said. That you're here voluntarily. That you release Moretti from any obligation to rescue you. That you accept transfer of custody to my chosen buyer." I took the pen he offered, scrawling my signature across the bottom without reading the fine print. What did it matter? The words were meaningless compared to the outcome. "Now let him go," I said. Vittorio nodded to his men, who moved to unlock Dante's chains. He dropped to his knees, then struggled to his feet, every movement clearly painful. But his eyes never left my face. "Lena," he said, his voice broken in a way I'd never heard. "Please, don't do this." "Too late," I replied, forcing a smile. "Already done. Now go. Get out of here before I change my mind." "I'll come back for you," he promised, his voice turning deadly. "I don't care what you signed. I don't care what deal you made. I will burn this entire city to ashes to find you." "I know," I said softly. "That's what I'm counting on." Vittorio's men grabbed Dante, dragging him toward the exit despite his protests. Our eyes met one last time, and I mouthed 3 words I'd never said aloud. "I love you." Then he was gone, and I was alone with my enemies. "Well, Miss Rossi," Vittorio said, that cold smile returning. "Let's discuss your new future." What Vittorio didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that Dante Moretti had never intended to leave me behind. The moment his men dragged him out of the warehouse, Antonio and 30 armed soldiers moved from their positions. The explosion came first, timed perfectly to breach the north wall. Then the gunfire, surgically precise and devastating. Vittorio's guards fell before they could react, taken out by snipers positioned on surrounding buildings. I hit the ground as the warehouse erupted into chaos, covering my head as debris rained down. When I looked up, Dante was there, somehow free of his captors, a gun in his hand and murder in his eyes. He shot Vittorio twice, once in each kneecap, dropping him to the floor, screaming. "That's for taking her," Dante said, his voice cold and empty. He fired again, this time into Vittorio's shoulder. "That's for threatening to sell her." Another shot, the other shoulder. "And that's for making her think she needed to sacrifice herself for me." "Dante," I called out, struggling to my feet. "Stop. It's over." He turned to me, and the rage in his eyes dimmed slightly when he saw I was unharmed. "Over? It's not over until he's dead." "The contract," Vittorio gasped through his pain. "She signed. Voluntary. No crime." "You think I care about a piece of paper?" Dante crouched beside him, pressing the gun against his forehead. "You took the woman I love. You hurt her. You tried to break me through her. There is no contract in the world that saves you from that." Dante Moretti. A new voice cut through the chaos, and everyone froze. Detective Clara Morrison stood in the breach, her badge visible, flanked by a dozen police officers. "Drop the weapon. Now." I'd met Detective Morrison once, briefly, at one of Dante's charity events. She'd been investigating organized crime in the city for years, always hovering around the edges of Dante's operations, but never quite finding enough evidence to make charges stick. "Detective," Dante said, not moving the gun from Vittorio's head, "this doesn't concern you. A warehouse full of weapons and bodies says otherwise." She took a step forward, her own weapon drawn. "I'm giving you one chance to do this the smart way. Drop the gun, step back, and we can all walk out of here without anyone else dying tonight." For a long moment, I thought Dante would refuse. The muscle in his jaw jumped, his finger tightened on the trigger, and I could see him calculating odds, considering collateral damage. "Please," I said quietly. "Dante, please. I don't want to watch you throw everything away for revenge. Not after everything we've been through to get here." His eyes met mine, and slowly, so slowly, he lowered the weapon, let it fall to the concrete with a metallic clatter. "Smart choice," Morrison said, gesturing to her officers. "Cuff him, and someone call an ambulance for Castellano before he bleeds out." As they pulled Dante's arms behind his back, securing the handcuffs, he never looked away from me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry you had to go through any of this." "Don't be sorry," I replied, moving toward him despite the officers trying to stop me. "Just promise me you'll fight this, that you won't give up." "I promise." A slight smile touched his bloodied lips. "I don't know how to give up, especially not when it comes to you." They let him out, and I was left standing in the wreckage of the warehouse, surrounded by police and crime scene investigators. Morrison approached me, her expression unreadable. "Miss Rossi, you're going to need to come to the station to give a statement." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but that depends on what you tell me about your relationship with Dante Moretti and what happened here tonight." The legal battle that followed consumed the next 3 months. Dante was charged with attempted murder, assault, and a laundry list of weapons violations. The prosecution tried to add racketeering charges, but without Vittorio's testimony, which he suddenly refused to give despite his injuries, they couldn't make them stick. I testified at the preliminary hearing, my statement carefully crafted by the lawyers Sophia had hired. Yes, I'd been kidnapped. Yes, Dante had come to rescue me. Yes, there had been violence, but in self-defense, and in defense of others. The contract Vittorio had forced me to sign was deemed inadmissible, signed under duress. The judge, who I later learned had been on the Moretti payroll for years, was surprisingly sympathetic. Bail was set at $5 million, which Sophia paid without blinking. Dante came home to the estate on a cold December morning, looking thinner and harder than when he'd been taken away. The first thing he did was pull me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Never again," he murmured into my hair. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again." "You might have to," I replied. "I've been offered a job, managing your mother's charitable foundation." He pulled back, surprised. "My mother wants you to work with her?" "She says I have good instincts and that the foundation needs someone who isn't afraid to make hard decisions." I smiled slightly. "Also, I think she likes having another woman around who doesn't faint at the mention of your name." "It's a good opportunity," he said slowly. "Legitimate work, safe, respectable. You could build a real career there." "Is that your way of saying I should take it?" "It's my way of saying I want you to have choices. To not be trapped in my world if that's not what you want." I took his hands, feeling the calluses from years of violence mixed with the gold ring he'd never removed, the one his father had given him. "I've made my choice. I chose you when I adjusted your tie 9 months ago. I chose you when I warned you about Giovanni. I chose you when I traded myself for you in that warehouse. And I'm choosing you now, Dante. All of you. The darkness and the light. The danger and the safety. The empire. And the man. You deserve better than this life," he said, but his hands tightened on mine. "Maybe. But this is the life I want. With you." He kissed me then, soft and desperate, like he was still afraid I might disappear. When we finally pulled apart, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I bought this the day before you were taken," he said, opening it to reveal a ring. Not ostentatious or flashy, but simple and elegant. A single diamond set in platinum. I was planning a whole romantic proposal, but then everything went to hell. So I'm doing this now, even though the timing is terrible and I'm currently out on bail and facing possible prison time. "Dante, Lena Rossi, will you marry me? Will you tie yourself legally and permanently to a man who's probably going to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder? Who comes with enemies and complications, and a family business that will never be entirely legitimate? Who loves you so much that he'd burn the world down rather than lose you?" I didn't even have to think about it. Yes. The trial, when it finally happened 6 months later, was a media circus. Dante sat calm and composed in his tailored suit, the picture of respectability while the prosecution tried to paint him as a monster. I watched from the gallery, Sophia beside me, as witness after witness testified about his character. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they acquitted him of the attempted murder charges, convicting only on the weapons violations. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of probation and community service. "Justice has been served," Detective Morrison said to reporters outside the courthouse, though her expression suggested she didn't believe it for a second. Dante didn't celebrate. We simply went home, back to the estate, back to the life we'd built together. 2 years later, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the positive pregnancy test in my hand. We hadn't been trying, but we hadn't been preventing it either. The foundation was thriving under my management. Dante had divested from most of his illegal operations under pressure from the plea deal, and our life had settled into something resembling normalcy. I found him in his study, reviewing reports for the restaurants and clubs that now formed the bulk of his legitimate empire. He looked up when I entered, smiling in that way he reserved just for me. "We need to talk," I said, holding up the test. For a moment, he just stared. Then he was across the room, lifting me off my feet, spinning me around. "Are you serious? We're going to have a baby?" "We're going to have a baby," I confirmed, laughing at his uncharacteristic display of joy. He set me down carefully, his hands immediately going to my still flat stomach. "I'm going to be a father." Wonder filled his voice. "We're going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" I asked. "For all the ways this changes things?" "I've never been more ready for anything." He kissed me softly. "You gave me back my humanity, Lena. Gave me a reason to be better than I was. This baby, our family, it's everything I never knew I wanted." Our daughter was born on a sunny September morning, exactly 3 years after the day I'd first warned Dante about Giovanni. We named her Sophia, after Dante's mother, who cried when we told her. As I held my newborn daughter, watching Dante cradle her with infinite gentleness despite his calloused hands and scarred knuckles, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From a simple gesture, adjusting his tie and whispering a warning, we'd built something impossible. "What are you thinking?" Dante asked, noticing my expression. "That I'd do it all again," I said. "Every terrifying, dangerous, impossible moment, because it led us here." He leaned over to kiss my forehead, careful not to disturb Sophia. "You saved my life that morning, and every day since." "We saved each other," I corrected. And as our daughter opened her eyes for the first time, dark like her father's with flecks of gold like mine, I knew it was true. We'd taken each other's broken pieces and forged something stronger than either of us had been alone. A family, a future, a love that had survived attempted murder, kidnapping, and the complications of a criminal empire. All because I'd noticed something wrong and dared to whisper a warning.